Hey guys, welcome to today's class. Have fun.
Welcome back, guys, to our lesson in Literature in English for West African examination coming up soon. And this week we're going back to assessing African poetry. We start by reading out the poem, then having a quick glance at the background of the poet, the analysis, the themes, and the poetic devices. Basically, it just works for us to understand what the poem is talking about. Today we're going to be assessing ambush and the dining table. And afterwards, there is room for further discussion. And if you have any question, just put it right at the comments section. The Ambush is by Gbemisola Adeoti. I'm going to start by reading. The land is a giant whale that swallows the sinker with hook, line, and bait. A button dreams of a good catch. Fishes turn home as dusk. Blue Peter on empty ships. All petered out, with petered out desires. The land is a saber-toothed tiger that cries deep in the glade. Why infant shudder home? The grizzled ones snatch their gut. From bayonet of tribulation, Alton ventures walk at dusk. The land is a giant hawk that cuts unseasoned disaster as it hovers and hoots in space. The land lies patiently ahead, awaiting an ambush, those who point away from a direction, when nothing happens, towards the shore of possibility. As I said earlier, this poem is by Gbemisola Adeoti, who is a professor of English language at OAU in Nigeria. He's a seasoned Nigerian poet and a social commentator. Now, he wrote this poem to talk about the social political realities of a post-independence Nigeria, having lived through the Nigerian experience. He lived through the military regime and the gradual transition to democratic process, and thus we can say that he understands the perspective of that time and now that there's democracy. And he realized that there is like a continual trend of the country being rife with corruption, underdevelopment, inefficient leaders, unemployment, and well, broken dreams. So now we're going to get to the analysis and then I would be summarizing along the way. Like I said, The Ambush, the poem, it talks about the socio-political problems facing the country, in this case, Nigeria. The poem has 4 stanzas, and the first stanza describes the land as a giant whale. Giant whale to express how powerful and invisible it is. But the truth is, when you talk about land here, the land represents the political elites, it represents the political institution. So the land is probably it represents a country, but more of the structure of the country. Now this whale that swallows the sinker with hook, line, and bait, it conveys the message that the land, which we said is a political institution, frustrates the effort of its citizens by swallowing the nation's resources as well as the aspiration of the people. And so when you read this poem, the first thing that comes to your mind is you literally think of a whale leaping out of the sea and swallowing the sinker, hook, line, and bait of a fisherman that is waiting expectantly trying to catch a fish. Most times when people put out hook, line, and sinker and bait is to catch a sustainable fish, like probably a little fish or a fish that can easily be taken care of. And of course, the hook, line, and bait is way too small to trap a whale. But they're saying here because they're trying to like describe what the country could be like. They're saying that, oh, it's like a whale that would swallow up everything, everything in the sense that the national resources that people should tap into, and as well as the efforts of the people. Because I mean, if you're fishing and a whale comes out and swallow your hook, line, and bait, you have nothing else to catch the fish. So here is just a form of analogy which is trying to explain that, oh, okay, this is the land will frustrate its citizens, and yeah, it's expressed to be a giant whale, that while you're struggling, you have aspirations, you're struggling, this whale would leap out of the ocean and swallow up everything that you're trying to use to progress. By all petards with petered how desire, the poet means the citizens are drained of enthusiasm and optimism required to dream and set ambitious goals. Now let's move to stanzas 2. Stanzas 2 further likens the land to another fearsome creature. In this point, they are talking about the saber-toothed tiger, which is a fearsome. I mean, it's out of extinct now, but if you probably have a picture in your mind, is a tiger-looking creature with overgrown canine, which makes it look even more terrifying and aggressive. Now, it suggests that the land is like a fearsome creature, that it intimidates the citizens from agitating for a better life. Okay, we can just read the poem again. Yeah, it says, the land is a saber-toothed tiger that cries deep in the glade, while infants shelter home. Yeah, it already gives a concept of the fact that it's fearsome and an intimidating creature. The grizzled ones snatch their guts from the bayonet of tribulation, halting venture's work at dawn. So the land is like a fearsome creature that intimidates you, and now they're saying that while the citizens already face so much hardship because the resources to make their life better is snatched from them by the blue whale, here they cannot agitate for a better life because the land, another aspect of the land, is it's a fearsome creature that will intimidate you and um intimidate you and suppress you from agitating for a better life. So already you have your resources snatched from you, your means of livelihood snatched from you. You're frustrated by the fact that your effort comes to nothing, and then you can agitate for better conditions because you have the saber-toothed tiger that is intimidating you into silence. Now, the grizzled ones, which basically means the brave ones, all dare to challenge the status quo. They have to escape persecutions, which in stanzas 2 was described as the bayonet of tribulations. In stanzas 3, the land is described as a hawk who is hovering and hooting. And hovering and hooting over us, when you think about it, is when a hawk probably sights a prey and is is just right before the ox swoops down and take off with the prey it's sighted. So, and the hooting and overing can be construed as a form of looming danger, like it's a signal. Most times, when animals see this, they usually run for safety, or yeah, they run for safety because they know of the impending danger. And now they're saying that, oh, the land is also like a hawk, which is a very powerful bird, and there's always that ever looming danger. So now we've said the land will frustrate you, the land will intimidate you, and here is basically talking about the pervading state of insecurity in the country. So everybody is always ready to scrapple for safety, or basically keeping everybody on their toes in a struggle for like survival. You're always trying to survive because there's so much insecurity, because I mean there's not enough resources, so there's irate or probably robbery, um highway robbery, and every other violent crime, and you could form a victim to this. So the land is also very unsafe, and at the same time you're trying to like hide your head under cover because there is always a present danger. And this sense we can talk about failed states. Failed states are states where that do not cannot provide for their citizens cannot provide for their citizens, cannot help them economically, and at the same time, in such states, there is a pervading state of insecurity because everybody's in survival mode, right? Stanzas 4, which is the final one. Now it says that the land lies in ambush with the aim to attack any of the citizens heading towards the direction of success and significance. So the land not only fail as citizens, it also actively works towards hindering anyone that hopes to aspire for more or make ambitious leaps. The poem offers a metaphorical representation of the nation as a destroyer of hopes and aspiration of its citizens. So you can see we gradually started from the first stanza, which talks about how your efforts at trying to gather resources for yourself is frustrated by the blue whale. In the second stanza, we have a saber-toothed tiger that would intimidate you from agitating for a better life. In the third stanza, we have the looming hawk that is hooting and hovering over you, which signifies constant danger in the country. And here, fourth stanza is saying that. So when you finally decide that, okay, you want to take a different direction, you want to think outside the box, you want to probably do something for yourself, the land still lies in ambush with the aim to attack you and impede you from reaching your goal. So, in all, this poem is actually a very um, depressing, and it has this very underlining too of hopelessness because it talks about a country which has perpetually failed its people in every way, and that is what they mean by the land. And the land, like I said earlier, is the institution of government who has failed you, who has not fulfilled the social contract, and on every level they try to still impede you from doing better. Now, once we go to the poetic devices, we're going to like even thoroughly analyze each of the lines. Oh, and another thing I would like to point out in this poem is the nation which is referred to as a land, like I said, often frustrates our citizens' attempt to survive and make progress. And the predatory animals used in these poems, which is the saber-toothed tiger, if you notice, that is a land animal. The giant whale is an aquatic animal. A giant hawk is an arboreal animal, like it's found in the air, which shows that the citizens, like the people of the land, they face challenges and danger in the sea, on land, and in the air. I mean, that's just figuratively speaking. It just means that in every realm. So if they try this area, it's going to fail. There's a stumbling block there. There's a predatory animal that is like going to like silence them or intimidate them. So it shows that on every realm and every dimension, there is already an obstacle or already a problem that is going to stand as a challenge for you to progress. Now this poem takes on the mood that is gloomy. It has the underlying tone of pessimism because I mean, as we go advance to each stanza, you see that everything just keeps getting discouraging basically. It also has a tone of despair, lamentation, and hopelessness, like I mentioned earlier. And here I identified four themes: the theme of hopelessness and helplessness. So hopeless in the first stanza, where you toil all night and all day, you're trying to fish, and you don't get the fish, and then you still lose your fishing gear. So you lose the chance to get resources, and then you still lose the means to acquire those resources. Of course, that can bring in a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Actually, the fourth stanza talks more about this helplessness, because then by the time you try to forge ahead, there's still the land waiting in ambush to prevent you from moving forward. Fear and intimidation was really salient in stanzas 2, which talks about which introduced the saber-toothed tiger, which, like I said, is a fearsome creature and is there to intimidate you. And I mean, all the other predatory animals dare to as well dare to intimidate you, because I mean they're gigantic, It's more than what you can control. It's beyond your control. It's more than what you can tame, and they keep like hindering you from achieve the dreams. And the third theme is unrealized aspirations, which I also put in bracket here, broken dreams. So you cannot realize the aspiration because the land is constantly out to frustrate you in different forms, and like I said, in different realms. On in the sea, in the air, on land, the land or in form of a predatory animal is there to hold you back. And the fourth theme here, because that is what this poem is really talking about, is failed political leadership. So we have the institution of the government who is not doing anything to give you access to the resources. And when you decide to work hard and make it for yourself, they still have this laws or this regulations or this structure that is going to hold you back and going to prevent you from making something good of yourself. So it's different from the fact that okay, you don't rely on the government, you're trying to make a name for yourself and trying to succeed based on your hard work, but then the structure and the system is there to hinder you and still pull you back and frustrate you. Here we can move to the poetic devices. Now, the most dominant figure of speech here is metaphor, and which is why we have 1 minute we're talking about the land, next minute we're talking about the giant whale, and they're still all talking about the same instrument, the institution of government and the political elites who are there to like frustrate the ordinary citizen. So we have the land is a giant whale, that's a metaphor. The land is a saber-toothed tiger, a metaphor. The land is a giant hawk. The word fishes and land is also used metaphorically to refer to the ordinary citizens and authorities of the country, respectively, like I mentioned earlier. But of course, if you look further into the poem, there are other metaphors you can point out. Next, we have personification. If you notice yet, the land has been given an animate attribute of swallowing, hovering, and crying in the glade. In the last stanza, the land is personified to have the virtue of patience, which is lying patiently ahead and is awaiting in ambush. So, of course, the land is also like compared to a whale, a saber-toothed tiger, but indirectly too. They give them human they give them other human personification and animal personification by saying, oh, it's swallowing, hovering, and crying in the glade, which are all human attributes. Now, this poem also has alliteration. The line that says swallows the sinker, which is in stanzas 1, the S alliterates. Also in stanzas 1, all Peters with petered out desires, P alliterates. Overs and oots, H alliterates. Next we have symbolism. The animals used in the poem all symbolizes a different institution of the government. Likewise, the land symbolizes the instituted authority of the country. And like I mentioned earlier, the animals were intentionally presented to symbolize land-dwelling, aquatic, and arboreal animals. And it's also a broader symbolism for how frustrating the country can be in healthy realm. So which means you run to north, you find the same problem. West, you find the same problem. South, east, like basically there's a stumbling block for you or something that's going to intimidate you or that's going to thwart your effort in healthy realm. Next, we have allusion. There's a biblical allusion here alluding to the story of the Jesus call of the 12 disciples with Peter, who was a fisherman that toiled all day at the sea and caught nothing, which is in stanzas 1. So in stanzas 1, it spoke about the fisherman that is at sea that loses the hook, line, and sinker to the massive blue whale, and it also used the word Peter, and of course it's just a biblical allusion to the story. I mean, when you read that stanza, it actually brings to mind the story of the call of Peter in the Bible. Repetition. The land is repeated to emphasize the poet's deep love and attachment to his native land. So the land is also okay. It keeps saying, okay, that is a subject matter, and also to let you know that okay, it's not really literally talking about the land. It's talking about a country, the political structure of that country. Next, we identified a line of Ponier, which is a play on words, and the line says, all Peters with Petered out desire. Basically, it's just a play on words. It talks about Peter in the Bible and all Peters with Petered out, like basically turn the word Peter to a kind of a verb. Imagery. The use of the words like land, whale, oak, saber-toothed tiger, they all aim to achieve a graphic image in the mind of the reader. That is the visual idea of a fisherman fishing without making a catch, a whale that swallows the fishing gear, a fearsome saber-toothed tiger, and a giant hawk that is hovering in search of a prey. Like the first time I came across this poem, that was all that was playing in my mind. I could think about it vividly in my mind, and that was actually the aim of the poem. And we have onomatopoeia, which is oots, the sound that is made by a giant hawk hovering in search of a prey. And that brings us to the end of the analysis for this poem. And like I said, I hope you understand. Of course, my list of poetic devices are not exhaustive, so I will encourage further reading and further identification, self-identification. And I know that most times when the questions come, it comes in form of like a discussion. Probably discuss the imagery used here, and you probably have to like pick in ideas from different angles. But the explanations here are not exhaustive. It's just basically to identify and to help explain however limited. The next poem will be The Dining Table by Gbanabom, Hallowell. As usual, I'm going to start by reading the poem. Dinner tonight comes with gun wounds. Our desert tongues lick the vegetable blood, the pepper strong enough to push scorpions up our heads. Guests look into the oceans of bowls as vegetables die on their tongues. The table that gathers us is an island where gorillas walk the land by crocodiles, soft. Children from Alpha Beta, with empty palms, dine with us, switchblades in their eyes, silence in their voices. When the playground is emptied of children's toys, who needs roadblocks? When the hour to drink from the cup of life ticks, cholera breaks its spell on cracked lips. Under the split milk of the moon, I promised to be revolutionary, but my Nile, even without tributaries, come lazy upon its own now. On this night, reserved for lovers of fire, I'm full with a catch of gun wounds, and my boots have suddenly become too reluctant to walk me. Gbanabom Hallowell is a Sierra Leone poet and journalist, and this poem is influenced by his experience of the Sierra Leone 11-year civil war, which was fought between the rebel armed group known as the RUF, Revolutionary United Front, against the armed forces of the government who were regarded as corrupt at the time. Now, the cause of the fight, I mean, there were so many factors, but the major driving factor was the struggle for the control of the nation's resources, which is diamonds. And also, the RUF wanted to overthrow the government because they felt the government was corrupt and they wanted the national resources to be under their control as well. So yeah, the setting year of the poem is in Sierra Leone, even though it was not explicitly stated, but we could use that from the background of the poet and the story, which is very akin to the story of Sierra Leone 11-year civil war. This civil war lasted from 1991 to 2003, which is a long time. The event of the poem happens in the night time, which translates to a dark time in the history of the country. So here, the setting here is, dinner is at night, yeah, but it's specially used to represent a dark time in the country. The tone, the tone and the mood. The tone is gloomy, and the poet is generally sorrowful and lamenting at the end of the poem, towards the end. The poem has 3 stanzas and is a narrative poem that recollects the collective experience of the brutality of war, and as well as it also pictures the graphic and the agonizing images of the conflict. Like I said, the conflict in Sierra Leone was based on the struggle over the resources, and stanzas 1 actually refers to it as dinner. So yeah, they're not literally talking about food. No, it's just a poetic way, technical way of writing about what was really the source of conflict, which here is diamonds. And the dining table here is a gathering where patriots feed on each other rather than food. So like I said, dinner is not really food, and obviously they're not feeding on food. And when I say feed on each other, they're not literally feeding on each other, but I mean they're maiming and they're arming each other and they're killing themselves because of the dinner. And that's why it says that this dinner comes with gun wounds, injuries, and pain. And the guests who came to see the unfortunate event could feel the effect of the war and felt the pain too. When we talk about guests, I could talk about the international community. They're not involved in the fight, but they intervened in the war to try to quell the aggression. We also had journalists that were documenting documenting the war as at the time. There were other international citizens there, and here they refer to them as the guests. They saw the unfortunate event, and we can say they also felt the effect of the war, and they felt the pain as well, because so many times journalists and international aid workers, humanitarian workers, and every other person that comes that travels to war zones always get affected by the war as well. So yeah, even though it's a war and a conflict over diamond resources, there are other factors and actors that get involved and injured in the process of the war. In the second stanza, the poet reveals how the guerrillas, that's a rebel group, they operated freely, maiming and destroying. And on the other hand, the government armed forces, here they're described as the crocodiles, also predate on the ordinary citizens in the course of repelling the insurgency. Before I go further, I can talk about the irony of war here, in the sense that the rebel groups, their target is to fight the government and take over, and because most times rebel groups are seen as revolutionaries, they're seen as the freedom fighters, but in the process of fighting the government, they usually also operate and fight against the ordinary people, who are the civilians that have nothing to do with government. Sometimes they even end up fighting against civilians that would probably support their cause, because during war it's wartime is really free for all, a time for you to carry out your own private selfish ambition and maim and destroy, and it's basically a time of lawlessness. On the other hand too, the government forces too, they're not vindicated from this, because they do exactly the same thing. In the process of identifying the armed groups who are usually embedded among the people, they they fight ordinary citizens, they kill, maim ordinary citizens. Sometimes it's because they suspect or they imagine that the ordinary citizens are supporting the rebel groups, and so I said, it's free for all. They attack the citizens as well that and not bearing arms. So most times you see that the citizens are the ones caught in between this war. Like they don't really care whatever the rebel groups are doing or what the government is doing, but then they end up being the victim of this war. Like I said, both parties commit atrocities against non-combatant population, which is the normal citizens. And to worsen the case, after they've all pillaged upon the people, there is so much death and chaos. During this situation, there was a cholera outbreak. Because I mean, during war, there's usually a humanitarian situation where people are driven away from their homes, they lose their regular lives. There is usually problem with water and food supply, or because they have to flee their homes and end up in IDP camps, the cluster of people usually helps the outbreak and the spread of diseases. And in this case, there was a cholera outbreak, and even the citizens were already dying and suffering, and they had to run away from their homes, they still had to deal with cholera outbreak, which further claims more lives. So as you can see, it's just a whole story of grime and deaths and hardship. Now, stanzas 2 also talks about the children from the alpha beta. Yeah, this line simply talks about children who are conscripted as soldiers and denied the childhood privilege of playing. Now, the armed group, that's the rebel group, usually, and it was not just seen in Sierra Leone, it's seen in so many other African countries that experience civil war. They usually recruit, not I don't use the word recruit because most times it's not voluntarily, but they force children to join the ranks. So like children are forced to become soldiers. Children as little as probably 8, 9, 10, they are groomed at that age, teach them how to use guns. So the rebel groups, because I mean they need more hands, and also because they can, most times they snatch children from their parents and they force them to become soldiers that will fight along against the government. And of course, most times when government forces see them, they regard them as soldiers who are, which is not really proper, and then they get killed along the way. So the children are victims in the sense that they're taken away from their parents and then they're still forced to become part of the rebel group against their will most times. And in next stanza 3, it portrays the resolve of the poet to be a revolutionary. However, we realize that war is for those that have stomach for violence, and for him, he lacks the power, and more so is weighed down by the traumatic effects of the conflicts. Is tired of the injuries and destruction that war brings, and so much that his boot cannot carry him because he is tired of the war. So as much as he wants a change to a better government, he doesn't want it to come through war. He's tired of the war because it's just so much violence, and most times there could be so much violence and you won't still meet the goal. So here we can say that the poets agrees that there should be a revolution, there should be a change, there should be a social change, there should be no corruption, resources should go round the people, everybody shall have access to a better life, and probably the rebels have a good cause for fighting. But then he wants change, but he doesn't want the bloodshed. He's tired of the violence because at the end of the day, ordinary citizens that you're fighting for get caught in the conflict, and the destruction it brings actually makes the country worse for it. And of course, ever since Sierra Leone ended the war, they're still in so much economic hardship, and they've not had so much economic development because of the aftermath of war. It has like destroyed so many things. And that's the end of the analysis for now. And for the next slide, I attached a picture of a child soldier. I extracted this image from the movie Blood Diamond, which is basically about the civil war in Sierra Leone. So I would recommend it as a good watch because it talks about the aspect of there's so much diamond, the rebels are trying to fight for it, and of course because they get to like conquer some land, they have access to some mining fields. And the problem is, by the time they have access to these mines, they use the diamond to finance the war. So they use it to get more ammunition to fight against the government, and they basically make it a turn into a business. So, and unfortunately, sometimes during war zone like this, there are some external factors that like to keep the war going because the benefit from the resources. When during a conflict situation, diamonds or other resources found in the area can be easily smuggled out. I mean, smuggled because in exchange you get ammunition. But for the people that receive it, it gives them so much gains. It brings in so much profit to them. So while the country is in so much turmoil and destruction, there are external actors that are profiting from the destructions. Now we have the themes. The first theme here is the horror of war, which I think I've mostly covered in the analysis. It talks about the destruction that happens, fighting over resources, and when you have access to these resources, the resources go back to financing more of ammunition and destructive weapons. And like I said, even though the rebels are fighting to liberate the people in quotes or to get a better economic situation against the government and trying to remove the corrupt government, the citizens are the ones that bear the brunt of the war because they lose their life. There's so much bloodshed, families are separated, children are out of school, and it's just pure chaos. Another theme is patriotism. The serious note and the use of the first person singular, I, my, me, in the last stanza, it focused on the poet's love for his country. And of course, he also spoke about the revolution. Like, he really wants a social change. And it shows that he has so much love and loyalty for his native land. So, which I think is also a salient theme here. And of course, most times, rebels and revolution happens because you're trying to like make your native land better. So it's sometimes there is underlining patriotism, other times it is just greed. But most times it is flushed with the idea of, oh, I want to fight for my native land, I want to remove it from the hands of those who seek to destroy it kind of ideology. So there's patriotism in this, identified in this poem. And another theme here is child soldiering, which is, like I said, children soldiers. It is the use of children as soldiers in war. Children that are not, that don't even understand why people are fighting. And in this process of recruiting them, they're usually brainwashed, and naturally they're separated from their family because I mean no family will give up their child to fight an endless senseless war. So they are taken forcefully away from their family. They are brainwashed to seeing anybody that the commanders want them to see as enemies. And of course they witness the trauma of the mayhem and the chaos. So there's just so much problem with using children as soldiers. So it's bad enough that they are separated from their family. Children are also sometimes used because they are expendable in the sense that they're children, sometimes they're naive, they're easily bendable, and when they die too, there's no family that can basically find them because it's a war situation. Next, we can look at the poetic devices. The first one here is metaphor. The poem is metaphorical. We have the specific examples which talks about the desert tongues, oceans of bowls, split milk of the moon. But in the old poem itself, we still have to talk about pepper, which is a vegetable, but it's compared to blood because of its red color and because it's spicy and it causes pain. The eating of dinner here is metaphorical for fighting wars. So they're not literally eating dinner, it's metaphorical, like, oh, they're fighting wars over the dinner, which is natural resources, which is diamonds. And importantly, the war did not happen at doesn't necessarily happen at nighttime. I mean, war can happen at any time, but the nighttime here is used to symbolically refer to a very gloomy period in the history of Sierra Leone. And another metaphor here is the opposing parties, like the opposing combating groups, which is the guerrilla forces and the guerrilla forces, which here is actually known as the gorilla, and the crocodiles, which signify the other party, the government party. And I also like to add here that most times in civil wars, it's not just the rebels and the government forces fighting. There are also mercenaries who are probably hired by one of the party to fight on their behalf. So you could hire mercenaries from like South Africa to fight on your behalf if you're a rebel group, so the fight against the government. And along the way too, sometimes there are militias. Militias are groups in the country that are not the rebel. They're not fighting to change the status quo, but sometimes they fight in support of the government, even though they're not part of the armed forces. So you see that there are so many groups with weapons, and that could only mean chaos and mayhem in such country. The next we have hyperbole. The lion in stanzas 1. The pepper strong enough to push scorpion up our heads is pure exaggeration which is trying to heighten the pain caused by gun wounds. And of course, when you talk about oceans of bowl, of course there is no literally oceans of bowl, they're just trying to like exaggerate that part. The oxymoron here is silence in their voices. I mean, when you say the word voices, you can almost imagine hearing the voice of someone, right? But yeah, they're saying silence in their voices, which is there are two contrasting ideas: silence and voices. Voices are supposed to be audible, right? But yeah, it's this line says silence in their voices, which is a good example of oxymoron. And we have another device here, which is irony. Dinner tonight comes with gun wounds. Most times, dinner comes with merriment, or even if not merriment, the enthusiasm of, oh, you're about to eat, you're kind of happy to eat for the night after a long day. But here is, and normally you expect, oh, you're getting filled up, you're nourishing your body. But here, dinner tonight comes with gunwood, so there's no nourishment. It's just probably people having to deal with their gun wounds and pain at dinner, so which is ironic in the sense of it. Next, we have symbolism. The use of the word dinner symbolizes diamonds, and tonight symbolizes the dark time in Sierra Leone, which I've explained earlier, but I just added it here so they're specifically identified as a poetic devices of symbolism. Now, here we have rhetorical question. The line in stanza 2 that says, "The playground is emptied of children's toys. Who needs roadblocks?" This is a question here that is not waiting for an answer. It's a rhetorical question. Doesn't demand a response at this point, because you in between the lines you already know what it means here, because there is so much chaos happening at this point, and you have an idea of the fact that, okay, obviously children cannot be at the playground, talk less of their toys. And next we have metonymy, which is, here is the alphabet. A, B, C, D is a level of children's schooling used to represent early childhood school. So so yeah, metonymy is just basically explaining what alphabet means here. So it just means the ABCD level of children's schooling. Next we have imagery. Now this poem imbibes strong imagery because it evokes the vivid ideas of conflicts and the maiming that follows. You see phrases like gun wounds, vegetable blood. It brings to mind bloodshed and death. There are other words here too. It talks about scorpions, roadblocks, now playground, which are emptied of children's dolls. I think each line you're able to like vividly imagine what it could be like. You have an it's just bringing so much image to your head. And we have a euphemism, which here there are so many words here which mildly describes the horrendous experience of war. We have desert tongues, switchblades in their eyes, silence in their voices. Especially silence in their voices talks about the traumatic experiences of war on children. And switchblade in their eyes, like they have a probably a murderous look or intent on their faces now, because I mean they've seen so much death and it has become their reality. The line that says lovers of fire, yeah, it refers to the trigger happy soldiers. They enjoy the war. They've gotten so much used to the sound of gunshots that they actually revel in it. They enjoy it. So yeah, this words are euphemism to like soften what the idea of war could be. Next we have personification. The following lines give human characteristics to inanimate objects. The line that says in stanza 1, the pepper is strong enough to push scorpions up our heads. You know, like pepper obviously cannot push anything up anybody's head, but yeah, it's just a way of like expressing but giving it a human characteristics here. Or crocodiles solve. Crocodiles don't solve, humans solve, but here the line says crocodile solves, which is something human beings do. Or the line that says cholera breaks its spell on cracked lips. That's an example of personification used as a poetic device. Next we have pun. In stanza 3, the first use of the word Nile, it refers to the river Nile, which is found in the border of Egypt and Ethiopia. But then the second use of the word Nile is used as a verb to refer to the function of a river. And the line says, but my Nile, even without tributaries, comes lazy upon its own Nile. Now, that will bring us to the end of the poetic devices we are going to assess in this poem. Like I said, there are always the opportunity to do further readings and to identify more poetic devices. And then you can also send in your questions concerning this poem. Now, before we end this lesson, we can have a quick look at the trivia. Now, like I said, this poem talks about the war that happened in Sierra Leone, which actually happened, is a real event. So this is like a narrative poem on the part of the poets, trying to like remember that this happened and that happened. Um, Nigerian troops, they actually played a leading role as part of ECOMOG, which belongs to ECOWAS, to end the war in Sierra Leone. Diamonds and any other resources that are driving factor for war conflicts, they're known as conflict diamond or conflict minerals. So if it's any other resources, if it's tin, if it's steel, whatever resources could be, as long as it's found in an active conflict zone or is a factor in driving conflict, is known as conflict minerals. And in this sense, you call this resource here conflict diamonds. And also the 2016 film Blood Diamonds, it gives a vivid though not exhaustive account of the Sierra Leone war. It shows child soldiering, militias, foreign mercenaries, and smuggling operations, illegal mining activities, death, and internal displacement situations that were the realities of war. So, like I said, it could be good to like probably watch a movie like this. It gives a more visual expression to what the poem is talking about. And that brings us to the end of our class, our lesson today. Thanks again for joining in. And please send in your questions, send in your contributions, and I'll be happy to reply you anytime. Thank you very much and see you next week.
I hope the class was interesting. If you have questions, please drop them in the comment section or send us an email. We will love to help you further. See you in the next class.